co-host at the moment, am I?
Okay, well, mine should work all right. Okay. Right. Okay. If you're ready, Richard.
Yeah. Okay. So comrades, I'm going to try to not be too long with this. It's always a struggle. Roger asked Jack and I to do an introduction on I think predominantly the sort of state with the trade unions and what's going on in a little report on the US, and Jack and I discussed it, and we were happy to do that. And it was a toss-up who would come in first. I lost or won, whichever way you look at it. So I'm going to, and Roger's very generous. I do have a blog, but whether it's famous or not, that's another question. But so I'm going to head right into this. Wynn's introduction gave many examples of some of the events that have been taking place, and I think there's no doubt that I've used the term upsurge, I guess. There's no doubt there is an upsurge of activity in relation to labor, both among the organized and the unorganized workers in the US. And the way Jack and I and a few others around the blog, we have discussions, fairly informal discussions weekly, just to keep ourselves afloat. And we've agreed over the period here that in this post-pandemic economy is one of the causes of this. Of course, you can't have 2 years or more of praising essential workers, of calling them heroes. Down the road from me, there's a big banner outside an old, we called them old folks homes, it's CARES facility. Heroes work here. Well, they've treated those people like shit for decades, but you can't do that for 2.5, 3 years. Disappear Kim Kardashian's sex life from the screens and everything else, and promote workers, and then put that genie back in the bottle. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing what the pandemic is. One of the reasons we're seeing what we're seeing. Also, the present economy, the inflation, and so forth. But all of that has not just arisen. I mean, as Michael Roberts talks about the economy before, pre-COVID, the capitalism was not in a good state. The zombie company, he talks always about the zombie companies and lack of profitability, with the exception of big tech and so forth. So things have not, this is not a new phenomenon, but there is clearly an upsurge and an increase in activity, and that's a very positive thing. And so I'm going to begin I'm going to start with 2018 in this introduction, with the teachers' strikes. We had the teacher strikes took place, shot up in 2018, and in that year there was more work stoppages and hours lost than the past 30 years, since 3 decades. It was quite an event. And what was important about it, well, a number of things about it, a lot of things were important about it, is one, nobody predicted it. Not the academics, the labor experts, certainly not the self-styled socialist organizations. I wouldn't have predicted it. It shocked everybody that was awake. These events in education. And the other thing is, nobody would have, even those, or socialists, we all accept at some point that the working class is going to move into struggle, otherwise we wouldn't be active. But nobody would have expected this sector. Education, predominantly female, white collar, that would have, and that's on the one hand. And on the other, they all took place in red states, or states where there's Republican governors. They were Republican governors in Republican-controlled states. West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Arizona, Tennessee, took that southern swath, from swathe or swath, whatever that word is. It spread like wildfire. And And the spark really was West Virginia. They were in talks, and it was in the media, the teachers in West Virginia, and they were offered, as I recall, a 1% increase from the legislature. One of the things that I recall, they were offered a 1% increase from the legislature. And of course, the labor officials answer to that normally as well. We'll get the Democrat, we have to change the law, we have to get a Democrat elected. And they ended up going on strike. They went on strike against the wishes of the leadership, of the established leadership, who told them not to go on strike. They got a pay raise from 1% to 5%, and 5% for every state worker. Now, if you think about that, what a selling point for being in a trade union. You've got a 5% raise, and I didn't do anything. I'm not on strike. You know, it's better than the normal is join AFSCME, you get a AFSCME credit card at a cheaper rate. You know, this was a huge event, and then it took off. It took off as I've described. So I think that's a real starting point for me anyway, in relation to this little introduction here. Is the other question is, why did the teacher strikes occur in these states? Because yes, teachers have been savaged, nurses, just like nurses, teachers have over. In '96, I ran for Oakland City Council. There was a teacher strike then. We all know they've been after the public sector since the emasculation. Oh, is that a sexist word? Got to be careful these days. Since the undermining of the industrial unions, and now the private sector is under 7%. The public sector probably between 30 to 35. So there's been an organized offensive against the public sector. They want to privatize education. So yes, there's been these attacks, but on the NEA, which is the National Union for Teachers outside of the AFL-CIO, is the largest union in the country. In California, they got 300,000 members. So the teachers are a prime target. But the thing is, it's not just that. The reason, in other words, an economic attack, the reason that they attacked that they occurred where they did was that the labor bureaucracy was either non-existent or weaker. They couldn't stop them. They couldn't stop this movement from the rank and file. And what a great opportunity it was to build on this, what really was a shift. Nobody would have dreamed we were always taught you can't strike in West Virginia, you can't strike in Kentucky, you can't, it's against the law. We got to get the Democrats in, we got to change the law. You can't do anything there, it's so restrictive. And so the bureaucracy were afraid of this movement. Where it could, they gave logic, they were dragged along by the rank and file. And where they could, especially in Arizona, they gave a lot of logistical assistance. They got the resources, but they didn't lead. They didn't lead this at all. They were afraid of it. And they gave some logistical support and tried to ride this out. And I'm sure behind the scenes, especially, they were doing everything they could to hope to ensure that it never went beyond the boundaries of the acceptable behavior and the Democratic Party politically. That's the big trap there. So that occurred, and that to me is one of the most important movements of labor we've seen. And after that, there was a teacher's contract in California. I'm not going to go into that in depth. Jack would know a lot more about that. That's his area. He's a retired teacher, as some of you know. But there was a teacher strike in California. In California, it's a very powerful, well, it's a much more powerful union state. 2 million workers are affiliated to the state arm of the AFL-CIO. The Los Angeles Labor Council, Federation of Labor, has 800,000 workers affiliated to it. So you've got the 6th or 7th largest economy. I've even read at one point where LA alone was the 10th or 11th largest economy. So in California, the labor bureaucracy, NEA has 300,000 members here. The labor bureaucracy is much more powerful. Democratic state, controls the legislature, has the governor, much more powerful here. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, Jack might have he'll have a lot more knowledge about it. But as far as I know, there was no rank and file revolt here. They didn't build on what happened in the South and extend it to California, one of the most powerful states. And so the danger was averted. And that strike, they have reform group in there, but it wasn't built on this movement. So I want to skip now, or bring us more now to recent events and the upsurge or increase in activity. And Wynn's introduction gives some examples, and I want to stress, because not everybody might agree with my take on this situation, but I want to stress that it is important. And of course, when you link it up to all the other socialists, the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, they bought them off in many ways. They threw hundreds of millions of dollars at black banks and black universities and black petty bourgeois. They want to build that, strengthen that layer. That you've had all of these movements, the anti-abortion, you know, the whole thing about abortion. It's all festering here. There's no doubt about it. So these things are positive. But I've been here a long time, and I was active in the union movement for 30 years, and I think we have to have a balanced assessment of it. And I would say, in relation to some of the Wynn's introduction, and as I say, I could be wrong, and it's good if you have a discussion about it. I don't believe there's a resurgence of working class militancy, to be honest with you, in the sense that an independent struggle of workers, independent of the Democratic Party, independent of the bureaucracy, a real movement from below. I don't believe that's happening. And I think the teachers' strikes that began to happen, that clearly began to happen. But I think now, not so. And I don't know about a wave of strikes. I mean, I read Payday Report, and it's a good thing to check into Payday Report. But I mean, if I said to Jack one time, I read this, I think the country was aflame. And I'm not sure about how he reports strikes and protests, or whether it's just, I don't know. But I don't feel there's a wave, and I don't believe there's a wave against, a revolt against the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy is hated. The bureaucracy is hated, there's no doubt about it. It has an army of staffers, many of them liberal, left, many of them ex-left groups. I've found myself in negotiations sitting across from a guy who was in a Trotskyist organization, accused me of being a reactionary because I thought an episode of Dallas was funny. This was when I first came here in '73, and he was now a federal mediator. Where was I? Yeah. I said I think it's a bit too strong to say there's a revolt against them in that sense. And in relation to unionization, there's not a surge of trade union recruitment in the sense that I'm interpreting these terms my way. So there's not a surge in terms of the unions and the rank and file of the unions being mobilized to force bosses to unionize. There's not an independent movement here of that. Unionization, as good as it is, all of the Starbucks stores that are applying for unionization, we've seen it at Apple. This is all a good thing, but it's all through the NLRB. This is all through legal channels, nothing illegal here. And it's still an important aspect, because the bosses respond with harassment, meetings, anti-union meetings, terrorism, workplace terrorism, I call it. They with perks. Amazon's introduced a lot of perks. The labor bureaucracy is behind the scenes. I always figure that they're much more treacherous mob than you've got over there, to be honest with you. And so this unionization has come about through that. And my union grew rapidly, AFSCME, but through in bringing in associations. It would meet a group of independent workers that were librarians at so-and-so, and they'd make a deal with the leadership of that, you'd bring them into AFSCME, and then they got a new deal, they got more dues money, and they grew that way. So I think we have to just be careful and look at it with very critical eyes. As I say, the mass media in this country is, when I watch the stuff in Britain, I say there's different countries here, right now, as I'm talking, the ILWU that controls the docks, from Oregon to Mexico, the docks are organized into the International Longshoremen Workers Union. They've been in negotiations for 3 months. We've heard nothing, not one word about this strike. Biden, the union leadership, and the port bosses have agreed that they've agreed to concessions. They'd agreed they're not going to be disruptive. They don't want to hurt capitalism in the post-pandemic era and its recovery. This is a union, and particularly the local one here, because the 34 strike took place in San Francisco. This is a union that has some militant past that it tends, in some of the individuals in it, in my opinion, tend to use in a very bit of a dishonest way. That might be too strong a word, but so we've heard nothing. This is a union that could shut down the ports, shut down the economy of California, and of course that has about 12-14% GDP of the US, something like that right here. So we've heard nothing there. There was even an interview, I think Steve Zeltzer did an interview with one of the former presidents of the local here, and I thought, oh well, I'll hear something from him. Not a word. Never mentioned the contract at all. Steve didn't ask him either. I thought I would hear something there, but nothing. They've made a deal with the bosses and Biden, and that's it. So when I say about the bureaucracy being under siege, they're not under siege from a wave of rank and file activity in that sense. I want to give another example. There's been a historic change in the way that the UAW votes. They couldn't vote for their own leaders. So there was a vote taken recently within the UAW to change that, and it passed, and it's very important that it passed. There was actually a debate now with 4 or 5 or 6 candidates, one of them being a candidate of the group that doesn't even believe unions are workers' organizations, the David North. There's a crazy sort of characters. They don't even believe unions are unions, and so that was an important thing as well. They can now vote on their own leaders, but this came about through an intervention of the state. The corruption was so bad among the trade union, the UAW leadership, and I think less so mafia type stuff, more just graft, bribery, all of that crap that the bosses do to buy off trade union leaders. It came about by the state had to step in and said, you got to do they've got to do something. So they stepped in. So that vote came about because of that. One UAW worker said to me, thank God for the FBI. We got to vote on our own, so that wasn't through a revolt from below. But now there's a new reform group formed in the UAW, and they were important in getting that vote passed, and they're a decent bunch, it seems to me, from what I know about it. It's called Unite All Workers for Democracy. Now, this is a common thing you see here, like Teamsters for a Democratic Union. And this group is very heavily dominated or influenced by labor notes characters. A lot of them are lower level bureaucrats, former employees of the internationals, and their labor notes has some influence. They can organize a lot of rank and file. They can get big meetings. They've got resources. Normally, when there's a movement from below, like in the teachers, labor notes comes in, and of course they attract them because they have power. I don't have any power. They're important. But this issue of when we had the AFSCME caucus that we formed, that was wrecked by the CWI really when they expelled us, is that this is common in the labor movement. So-and-so workers for democracy, because there's 2 reasons for that. One, the bureaucracy is not going to challenge that. They believe in democracy. So it's a way of avoiding a struggle with them. And secondly, you're not going to get workers down to the union hall on that basis. You're not going to drag them from the little league, the childcare, the overtime, the hectic life people lead. Come down the union hall. We're going to vote for democracy. Who can vote at the council? You've got to have things, concrete things. So, but that's not an accident that they use these. They avoid any programmatical details. I mean, opposition to the team concept should be number 1. You can't win if you're arguing that you're on the same team as the person you're fighting against. So that's a way that all of these groups. I remember I came back from the AFSCME International Convention one time, and a guy said to me, I don't know why you go there, it's undemocratic. I said, no, it's not. They just have all the votes. They got the numbers, they control the mics. If I didn't believe that you could, in building an opposition there and fighting, which we were doing, and quite successfully, If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't go. You know, but this idea of just democracy in the abstract, it's an avoidance. Now, I'm going to, I added a couple of things this morning. I wanted to really say something about Kentucky, but let me, so what I'm going to say is my experience leads me to be more skeptical and more cautious, not the negative. I have faith the working class will move into struggle and in a serious way, and this country is going to be quite violent, I believe. But I believe what's happening is the potential for a real offensive nationally, but it's not here. And at this point, and unfortunately, the bureaucracy with its huge army of staff, a lot of them ex-left groups, some of them still in left groups. Bill Fletcher, who's considered a Labour leader, who was a bureaucrat, who was an advisor to Sweeney, the head of the AFL-CIO. You don't get that job by being a threat to the bureaucracy. But he's considered a Labour leader. David Bacon, another one. I know. I was in the movement with them. So the bureaucracy is very adept at grasping victory from the jaws of defeat, grasping defeat from the jaws of victory, and turning defeats into victory, calling them victories. And so they're very adept at doing that. And I think that's one reason I am cautious in being overly a little bit sober in my view, and also the oppositions in the Labour. It's not like the 30s. I mean, the opposition group that's in the UAW. I mean, it was something to see a socialist organisation candidate debating on the TV. You can see it on YouTube, but they are just. I'm afraid I have no. I think this left will play no significant role in the movement ahead. The movements ahead. Hopefully, they'll learn through it. But the left also doesn't generally challenge the bureaucracy at all. And so, two final things. As I say, this is just an assessment. I want to say that we've got elections in November. So this is not a perspective about what I think is going to happen. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm very cautious about saying what's going to happen because, as I say, in here, who knows? But we're having elections that will have an effect. Those elections will have an effect. And I want to just, and I want to also stress that, and I'd like to, I was very much involved in the Kentucky stuff from afar. The bureaucracy, I don't know if I said this, I have it written down, but the bureaucracy there, it was a great opportunity to the Trumpers in the East, in Appalachia, the poor whites, poor blacks in Louisville. There was miners that were blocking the railroads in mid Kentucky. The bureaucracy, the trade union leadership, AFSCME, teachers, SEIU, and the Teamsters, they called a press meeting and attacked the more militant black parents and black work teachers that were caught having sick outs and disrupting things. So those are two big problems for me. That I think the left, there's no real organized left in there, and that the bureaucracy, it will take quite some movement to shift them. And I'll leave it there. I'm happy. How long did I do? How long did I take?
Don't worry, it was just right.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So can I come in now, Roger?
Yes, I was just going to call you. I just want to thank Richard for a very refreshing and stimulating introduction. And Jack, over to you.
Okay, thanks. So I want to begin by making an analogy about with earthquakes in terms of what's going on in the movement here, which is, I believe, first of all, that we need to be optimistic. We also need to be realistic about what's going on. So it's not that there's nothing happening now. There's certainly tremors going on. There's organizing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So I'm going to talk about, what I see as significant. But this is not, if there's a real major upsurge in the US working class, we will know about it. We're not going to have to read about it in Payday Report. And we didn't have to read about Occupy, and we didn't have to find out about the red state teacher strikes by going to a meeting. When the working class moves en masse, we know about it. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing that's happening. I make an analogy to earthquakes. I live less than half a mile from the Hayward Fault, one of the major earthquake faults in California and the US. There are tremors that occur almost every day, maybe more than every day. Small ones. Usually we don't feel them. Sometimes we do, and they occur within a mile often of the house. There were 1 or 2 jolts last week. That's not the big one. It could be a precursor to the big one, but we have a very large number, and if every time we say the big one's coming, we won't be prepared after a while. There are tremors going on in the US working class all the time. What's going on now, I think, is more than just a background rumble, though. I think there's something that could potentially perhaps lead to something major. It's not that yet. It's not that, and it may or may not become that. So I'm hopeful that there'll be a lot more, but I agree basically with Richard's assessment that this is not there. Certainly not yet. But what is different about this? There are things that are different now, and we should really look at than what's happened over decades. I'll talk about teachers a little bit later. Richard talked about it and asked me to come in on California, but I want to say what's going on. Maybe perhaps there are cracks in the gig economy. And that could be really significant because the gig economy, the Silicon Valley, Starbucks, and so on, and I put charter schools in there too, the disruptors who are out to disrupt, they're out to smash unions, they're out to lower wages, to get rid of guaranteed benefits and so on. And now in the spring, we read that there were 50 Starbucks stores organized. Then it went to 90. Now there are over 200 organized, and there are elections going on now in the next few weeks in between 50 and 100 additional. Now that's significant. There are about 25 workers per store on average. So we have 5,000 to 6,000 or so who are now organized at Starbucks. Now there are 9,000 Starbucks stores in the US alone. So we're talking about, 2 to 3%. But if we get, if this continues, because it's been snowballing, if this does build, from 50 to 9, now it's over 200, you get to 500 or 1,000, that's a significant, that's a significant crack. And what's going on is Starbucks and some of the big Amazon and so on, they are starting to increase in certain areas. They're using carrot and stick. So there's an increase in pay in areas where they're worried about unions for some of these places. And at the same time as there's more surveillance and quicker firings and so on. So this may be the prelude to a lot more. Starbucks, what's different about Starbucks is that, and about what's going on, you may have read that Amazon, there's organizing in Amazon. And so far, it's only one location. However, that location is a mega location. It's in Staten Island, which is the East Coast Regional Distribution Center. Most regional warehouses at Amazon and other such businesses have 400 to 600 or so workers usually. There are 8,000 in Staten Island in the one that's been organized. Amazon is fighting in the courts to get it overturned. They've lost 2 decisions. There's another location, the Southern Regional Distribution Center in Bessemer, Alabama, which has about 6,000 employees, where Amazon has narrowly won in 2 elections, and they could lose there or elsewhere. These can be significant. They can be harbingers of things to come. Now notice, these are single company unions. These aren't industrial unions, and they're not craft unions. They're single company unions where you have, so it's just Starbucks. And then it's the Amazon labor union. It's just Amazon. And while these unions, Richard's right, these are National Labor Relations Board, NLRB elections. In Staten Island, it was quite militant. They fired the main organizer and were forced to hire him back by decisions. Now, I don't have time to go into the NLRB and how the NLRB and the other anti-really labor acts came about as the deal that part of the deal that ended the 1930s upsurge. And it was hailed by many, including leftists, the NLRB. And I agree with Richard about the danger, but I'm also for using, I mean, there's no alternative in many situations other than to try to pull cards and win elections. Those elections are going to be supervised by the NLRB at this time, given the situation in this country. So we're critical of it, at the same time needs to be used. Now, in terms of, I want to jump to, to education briefly. Richard gave a very good account of the red state teacher strikes, what's going on in Kentucky and so on. Maybe, and the way that the bureaucracy came in, the state and national bureaucracies, keen concept, class collaboration, they flooded those states with staffers in order to pull people back, to squash militancy, to say, play the game, vote for Democrats, phone bank, and so on. That's that's our only hope. But maybe, and there's a big hope, that some of those militants from the red states will have learned lessons, and they may be dormant now, some may be, and in another upsurge, we may see many of those people starting, or at least some of them starting to emerge and play leadership roles. Richard's right about they're not only going to the Labor Notes Network, but why they went to that Reform Network, because they needed help. They were looking for an alternative to the bureaucracy. Who has resources? As Richard said, can't turn to us and expect us to be, providing those resources. We don't have them. Labor Notes provides them, and I think that there are, among the thousands of people who just attended the most recent Labor Notes conference, there are some, and maybe many, who can, given an upsurge, start emerging as real leaders. They're not, the Labor Notes leadership is going to be pulling back, and at a certain level saying, collaborate and so on. But, there's some hope there. So it's really important to try to crack the gig economy and to understand what's happened in the US. When we talk about, we tend to look at labor and the existing unions. The representation in the private sector is down now to 7%. When I was, both of my parents were work. My father was a warehouse man, my mother was a school secretary. And so when I was 8 years old, and maybe younger, I used to, come home at lunchtime. I was a latchkey kid, and I'd read the union newspapers, which were in the mailbox. At the time, about 35%, I think, 30 or 35% of workers in the mid-late 1950s in the private sector were unionized. It's 7% now. What has happened? There's been a huge growth in private sector. We know about that privatization and so on. Walmart, 1.4 million workers, no unionization. They closed a few years ago 5 Walmart sites because of fear, because the unions were making headway, unionization was making headway there. Costco, a big box store, is held up as a model of unionization. It's the most unionized of the warehouses. And we're told many times, shop at Costco, it's unionized. Costco has 17,000 unionized employees. That's far less than 20% of its workforce. In fact, California is the state where Costco has unions penetrated the most, and a little less than 20% of California Costco is unionized. So how are we going to crack into the gig economy? Well, Starbucks and Amazon are starts, and it inspires others. As Apple, not much yet. There's one store in Townsend, Maryland, TOWSON, near Baltimore. One Apple store has been organized. But if Starbucks comes through, and if there are a few more Amazon sites, and if this snowballs, we're going to start seeing, or we may start seeing, a lot more. And there's something else, which is that we have as has been discussed here and elsewhere many times, there's an unraveling of capitalism going on right now. Things are appreciably falling apart. I don't have to go through what the various crises are. Thus far, the right wing has made more headway in the U.S. than have the leftists and has labor. And not just in the U.S. If we look at what's happening in Italy tomorrow with the elections in which the Fratelli d'Italia are likely to be the largest vote getters in a right-wing bloc that's going to win. A right-wing bloc just won in Sweden. You have the National Rally, Marine Le Pen in France, although they haven't won, they're a looming threat. So there's a real problem, and there's a problem which is that when we say that capitalism is unraveling, the common sense, solution of neoliberalism, that this is the best that can be done, and that's falling to the wayside, and people are looking for solutions. And thus far, too many have looked to the right as a solution for lives that have been lost to deindustrialization, loss of housing, and the horrors of global warming and so on. And so what we're seeing when I say the right wing, there's unfortunately a nativism, an anti-immigrant, the leading edge is anti-immigrant labor, nativism, especially racist, and a fear of what I call national social democracy, which is social welfare programs for us. That has arisen in Italy, in France, not so much in the US now, where evangelicals and lunatics seem to predominate the ideology, but it can arise. And I don't rule out that part of it can arise out of the right wing of the Democratic Party, with a nativism that takes root there, at least partly. So we need to be aware of that. And so I think that in order to move forward, we have to look at raising more than simply the economic and traditional. We're going to have to take a lead also, as I'm sure everyone agrees, in especially fighting, against nativism, and in general putting forward a social vision that, of course, opposes classism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and so on and so forth. This only becomes possible, though, on a class basis. It's not through an identity politics basis, where people seem to assume that if you put forward 10 different sectors, each putting forward their own primarily, and ignoring the others, that somehow you're all going to meet up in socialist heaven. It doesn't work that way, and that failed solution, which was a model of, I believe, the American SWP in the anti-war movement, I think has been disastrous. So, one briefly on teaching, to the point Richard said, perhaps I should elaborate on in California. Following the red state teacher strikes. Oh, and on the red state teacher strike, it's also important to note, someone, I think Matthew put in the chat, I believe he wrote it was actually illegal for teachers strike in West Virginia. That's right. And it showed that you don't have to, if you have a strong enough movement, you can roll right over the laws. But the West Virginia teachers, they didn't just demand things for themselves. They demanded for all state workers, and then for all of the community. They had class-wide demands. That was important. In the red states, they used social media, and they formed groups outside the union, not against, but that included parents as well as teachers and other school workers. And they didn't counterpose it to the union, but it took the lead in the organizing when the organizing was really going. After the red state tide was rolled back, and the national and statewide unions flooded with staffers, the militancy ebbed, and so on. Well, back then too, we heard about a great strike wave that was occurring among teachers in the fall of 2018 in the winter. I can go back and show you article after article about this supposed wave. The wave, if it ever existed, it broke hard in Los Angeles and Oakland, considered the two of the most militant teacher unions in the country. I was on the executive board and bargaining team of the Oakland Teachers Union for several years. I wrote about what happened with that strike and also some about what happened in Los Angeles. So what happened was, first of all, in California, unions are organized by school district, and the contracts are negotiated district-wide. So you have hundreds and hundreds of contracts throughout the state. CTA, the California Teachers Association, the statewide largest union, to which both OEA and the Los Angeles Teachers Union, UTLA, are affiliated, deliberately keeps the contract expiration dates separate and different among the leading unions, in order to, and I know it's deliberate because I've brought this up with them when I was on the bargaining team numerous times, trying to get some motion. However, in the fall of 2018, as it happened, because of different lengths of time that they were out of contract, both the Los Angeles Teachers Union and the Oakland Teachers Union were out of contract and gone through negotiations, went to impasse through mediation, and were about to be strike ready. They could have struck together, and that would have been, of course, much more powerful. Had these two unions which get the most publicity, had they struck together. They deliberately did not. The Los Angeles Teachers Union struck in January. The Oakland Teachers Union waited until that was settled and then struck in February. In both cases, opportunities were lost. It wasn't that they were awful, terrible, although in some ways the Oakland one was, which I'll talk about in a second. But there was much more that could have been accomplished. Instead, what they did is the Democrat State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, and one or two other leading Democrats, Rob Bonta, who is now the State Attorney General, who at that time was a state senator from Alameda, which is a neighbor of Oakland, came in and said, look, we support you, but we can't support you any further. If you don't settle this strike now, then we're going to have to, come down very hard. And
Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you could say another 5 minutes maximum, is that all right?
Yeah, I'll try not to take that long. I should only take 2.
Sure. I don't want to stop your
No,
flow.
it's fine. Let me just try to finish this. So what they did was to essentially call in call in the leadership and say, you got to settle now. And the leadership, who basically leftists in supporters of the ISO and Solidarity to a large degree in Los Angeles, said, oh, okay, well, of course, yeah, well, we can't go against the Democrats. They didn't, that wasn't the announcement, but that was actually the way that it worked. And so you have coordinated attacks by the capitalists, which maybe Steve will talk about what FICMAT is doing. He put a video up, financial auditors, quoted by the state, against many school districts and community college in California. But the unions, each one must fight separately and must knuckle on to the Democrats. In the Oakland settlement, which happened, Oakland went on strike a few weeks later. It was a very powerful strike support. It was called off unilaterally by the leadership without consulting membership. And what they did is they made a deal to sacrifice the jobs of over 100 classified employees who aren't organized, but they're in different unions, student programs, libraries, and so on, or closed down, and that happened immediately after the strike. And that was the basis. There was a conscious deal made, and that they don't deny this. I mean, in fact, they admit it. In order to end that strike, you had a real opportunity lost. Those two together could have done much more, and maybe could have rekindled what had happened in the Red State teacher strike. But the leaderships of these unions, even the leftists, are basically knuckle under to the team concept of class collaboration. When push comes to shove, we have to be on the same team as management and the state, and in this case, in education, management and the state are one team. So I'm gonna stop there. I don't want to go on any further.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jack and Richard. I know there's another number of comrades here from the USA and from all parts. So who wants to make the next contribution? Could you raise your hand either physically or online? Carol.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One of them is that where I agree with Richard's assessment, essentially, I think that there is a sort of lack of sensitivity to what's actually happening, because while workers may be trying to go through the legal channels of NLRB and all the rest of it, it's like, who wants to take on revolution if they can do it through the means by which supposedly it's being offered? I think, you know, workers still have a certain belief that the union leaders, but much less so, and the NLRB, because Biden is the president, the best president for workers, we're all told, so that people are not going to chance it if they have another way around to get their demands won. But the fact is that the right wing, and especially the fascists, are really pushing for war. And so whether workers really like it or not, they're being forced out of jobs. They're being forced to take lower wages. People's salaries have been cut or not increased, and through inflation, their salaries have been decreased. And workers more and more are really becoming disgruntled with their lives and with the condition. I mean, the railroad workers were about to go out on strike, and Biden and the union bureaucrats completely sold them out. And while there's still a chance that they may go out, they were going to go out. And this is the most important sector, one of the most important sectors in the United States, because, you know, they can basically stop the economy from running. So once workers, I believe, have more confidence in themselves and far less confidence in the bureaucrats, that thing will break. That place where workers are now, which is through utter disgust, really, they're just utterly disgusted, will move towards what else can we do? The NLRB doesn't work. Our bureaucrats stand in the way. There's nothing that could be done. We're going to have to do that. And there's no knowing when that's going to happen, because nobody knew that the Virginia strikers were going to do that either. But there will be that moment where there will be no other choice for workers but to take to the streets, essentially, and to close down their industry. Just one last thing. Yesterday, I live in New York. There was a public workers meeting that was organized by, you know, some people were leftists there, but there were people who I'd never, and I've been involved for, you know, most of my life. I've seen lots of younger people who are in different unions who are organizing this public workers meeting. There were about 40 people that showed up. Unfortunately, one of them was in labor notes, and so she changed the chant from Workers United to people, you know, which was like astounding to me. But but these people represent a larger group of people in their own unions who are thoroughly disgusted with what's going on. And, I don't know what's going to come out of it. This was the second meeting, but the fact is that it didn't cover transit, but it covered DC 37, which is part of ASME. It covered the teachers, it covered college teachers, it covered the nurses. It was serious public sector workers. And so, as I said, I think that there's going to be that point where, plodding along and using the tools that workers have at this point, people will see that they're an enormous hindrance to them, and nobody knows what that point is, but I think we're moving in that direction.
Oh, thank you, Carol. We've got a number of comrades lined up to speak. Thanks very much. The next comrade is Charles, and then I'm asking Maya. So Charles, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I just had to squirt my cat with a little asthma medicine, so I'm back. Unfortunately, I know so many of the comrades on the call from the United States. It would be ideal if there were many people that are not familiar with each other, and that it was a symbol of something. I'm always regularly direct, and I don't mean to be affrontatious, but I am a socialist. So talking about the team concept and what goes on here in Oakland and the importance internationally. When I went to Argentina, the comrades there in a FLTI, you may or may not know, they were informing me about the militancy of the ILWU and how they constantly run strikes and for political reasons. And being from here, what I had to tell them was that, yes, they take their monthly safety day, which is a negotiated day off, and they turn it into a political action. And with the magic wand of socialist leadership, they turn it into a worker strike for Mumia Abu Jamal, or against the war, or for May Day, etc. So this is being done by a coterie of so-called Trotskyists and neo-Stalinists, Jack Hayman and Clarence Thomas in particular, and we all know what they're doing. At the Juneteenth meeting of the ILWU, they initiated Angela Davis into membership, and then she invited a Democratic council person up onto the stage for endorsement in the Oakland coming election. And this is the leadership that we have to fight for, because the masses are going to come and hit the streets. But the question is, what is the leadership going to do when we finally get into a meeting and start to fight for the demands and the intention of the workers and the historic task of the working class? And if our experience shows we're not ready. And I'll just give one example. During I think it was the 2011 period, we had a big uprising. It was one action after another. Occupy and the teachers and my union was out of contract, and we all got thrown together into the mix. And the transit workers were fighting, and the fight for 15 was happening. And we had all these meetings in Oakland trying to bring together some kind of leadership. It looked like the future Soviet, and the names, we know who they are. Now, did they take a page from Leon Trotsky? Did they start to demand jobs for all and share the work and shorten the hours and price commands under workers' control? No, they went for fight for 15 and raised the minimum wage. And many of these comrades, like an ex-comrade of yours, John Ryman, ends up voting and fighting for the Democrats. He made a big thing about demanding the fight for Biden. And I fought the comrades then on raising the demands for shorten the work week, share the work, put the wages under workers' control. And Jack Gerson and Comrade Bill from the teachers, Mandel, finally took me aside a few weeks later and said, oh yeah, we agree. We should have done that. These are the missed opportunities of not applying the methodology of the Fourth International and of Leon Trotsky, and they turn into defeats. Now we're still fighting for 15 when it wasn't a living wage then, and it's not a living wage now. And these labor notes bureaucrats can wave that in the face of the workers and say, we are the leaders. We need leaders that are going to fight for independence of the working class, fight for a workers' party, and apply the methodology of the transitional program. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Now, Comrade Maya from India.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yep, carry
Can
on.
you hear me? Great.
Yes.
You know, I was listening carefully to both speakers, and especially, the first speaker. And I just wanted to pitch, some observations and concerns. You see, broadly, what I felt, was that, the whole argument of judicial de-radicalization of workers' struggles and the trade union movement, is a recognized phenomena amongst many of us. And we see this, judicial de-radicalization happening, of course, very consciously by the state that's drawing on, it's using its labor policy, it's drawing on its labor regime. And, this is something that I felt that Richard very, very rightly seemed to indicate, this judicial de-radicalization, and therefore what it means in terms of these strikes that we have seen recently. I would just like to connect this tendency, this observation of judicial de-radicalization and the resulting trade union bureaucratism with America's imperialist accumulation. Now, this accumulation, I believe, facilitates the beating back of the radicalization of, the American workforce in very significant ways. I also am bringing this to the table, and I'm bringing in this aspect about, American imperialist accumulation to press for your observations on the distinct status of the American working class within world capitalism and how that shapes the potential of revolutionary struggles by this workforce or this segment of the working class in America. Now, it is an uncontested fact that the majority of African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and Native American segments represent the overexploited segment of America's working class. Having said this, the American working class is comparatively better paid and better placed in terms of social security, in contrast to the working class in several other parts of the world. Thus, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, are relatively better positioned, vis-a-vis the working class in Africa, Bangladesh, India, the Middle East, etc. It is therefore important to factor in, I believe, the relative prosperity of, America on a world scale, for it is within the larger dynamics of America's privileged position in the circuit of worldwide accumulation that we can better comprehend, I feel, the long-term outcomes of the anti-racism movement, for one, and also the ongoing workers' struggles that we have been, hearing about today. So to elaborate, I think it is a fact that, the low wages accrued by American workers in the labor market, and I'm talking, of course, about Black workers, Latinos, etc., has been somewhere mitigated, not removed altogether, but mitigated by substantial state welfare provisions extended by the American state, which facilitate a higher spending capacity than what their actual low wages would allow. Of course, with the steady cutback on state welfare expenditure in recent times, due to, of course, growing contestation of US hegemony by other regional blocs, by situation that COVID-19 threw up. Such shock-absorbing provisions, of course, in terms of more expansive welfare, are reducing in America, propelling the current unrest in many segments of the American workforce, and of course, trenchant criticism of the state. Overall, if you factor in these realities, what I'm trying to get at is, if you factor in these realities about American imperialist accumulation and read them against the backdrop of the kind of struggles you've summarized today. Would you agree that the potential for example, a multiracial revolutionary class struggle emerging from these otherwise militant worker struggles, and if I'm not wrong, they're stemming largely from the public sector, and show interesting rank and file initiatives. Overall, however, the potential for multiracial class struggles emerging from them is actually quite bleak. So your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Next, Comrade Matthew from Scotland.
Hi, comrades. No, the previous contributions are very interesting, I think is useful in terms of obviously the position of workers in imperialist countries is very different from those in the imperialized countries. But I mean, in terms of for the US working class, certainly for a large chunk of it, of course, is that real wages and real living standards have been going down for the last however many years, and in some cases, 20, 30 years or more. So the point, the thing is, the position we're reaching now at this point, of course, is that the working class can see and knows that it's actually, in a worse position materially and in terms of its bargaining position, etc., than its predecessors, and people can point to the fact that actually now they're being paid less than their parents or their grandparents for the same, in real terms, of the same job. And this is, I think, this is obviously driving, discontent and a degree of militancy and the rise of this movement. And I think there's no question there is a rise in terms of the number of strikes and the number of people involved, and the fact that you get new layers of people involved, and even such a thing as looking at people organising in small fast food organisations like Starbucks and Chipotle and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's about the youth, themselves actually saying, well, we need to do something about this. And you're also seeing, of course, you've got an enormous discontent with the unions as they are. I mean, the point being, what we're seeing now, of course, in the US. Okay, I'm observing it from outside the country. So, but you can see, deals are being voted down over and over again. The bureaucracy is doing deals with management, and the workforce is voting these down, and in some cases is actually taking strike action on the back of that, saying we want a better deal. Okay, I think that for the points the comrades have made, that clearly there's then a political question. And the political issue of the vacuum on the left, the fact there isn't a clear alternative to Democrats, the fact there isn't a clear left organisation that comes out that has some kind of standing, nationally or at least in the working class is absolutely clear. And that of course, is something can be seen through the whole thing. That there is an absence of that type of organisation. And that really is a vital component. But what we're seeing is that, as I say, the working class being willing and in some cases absolutely desperate to fight, because they're put in positions in which they're basically being told to work ridiculous hours for less money than their predecessors. And I suppose the real example now, of course, is the railroads, where huge numbers of people have actually left the railroad because the working conditions are so bad. And those people who are left working, in many cases, are forced to work whenever the companies want them to, for rotten money, and they're desperate to strike. And the thing is that the deal was done, or being put together as a lash up between the union bureaucracy, the Biden administration, and the management, clearly operating together, is not supported. That exemplifies, if you like, the position that chunks of workers are in. And the question is, okay, as I say, there's that position for the working class on one side, in terms of a diminishing living standards. The question of a political vacuum on the left, which is critical. The question is there then political growth of a serious political force? And that applies elsewhere too. It applies here. You can see it here. And then, of course, obviously, are we going to get a greater wave of militancy in the US working class, and it's critical for everyone. I mean, because actually, of course, the US working class, you know, for whatever, does occupy the front rank in terms of opposing the American imperium, which is, of course, effectively governs the world. The US working class is in the front rank, and all of us, stand and depend upon it in many ways, and see its struggles as being almost doubly vital. Thanks.
Yep, thank you, Matthew. Now, Comrade Steve Zeltzer, also from the USA.
Okay, well, I think
Yeah.
we're talking about a very new situation. I mean, for the post-war period, the capitalists, first of all, as a result of the Second World War, were able to make economic concessions to the working class in the United States. And that was one of the reasons for the success of the anti-communist purges and the establishment of the AFL-CIO. So we're talking about a long period of class collaboration with a pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist trading bureaucracy. Now, the decline of US imperialism and the attacks on the American working class are obviously escalating, and the war, the inflation, the COVID also add up to a great crisis for the American working class and the world working class for that matter. So I think that we have to look at how this is reflected in the unions, the organized working class, as well as unorganized workers who are organizing in their tens of thousands. It is becoming a mass organizing drive, some led by independent unions, mostly smaller ones, but also other unions are growing. The nurses union, for example, is growing in the South. Union organizing is rapidly growing even in the South. So what is happening? I think that the first is that the trade union bureaucracy, as in other countries, does not want these struggles to turn into a united struggle against capitalism as a system. So they try to keep it confined to just union contracts in the individual industry. And I think that that's obviously an impediment to take on a systemic crisis, which we're in. But I think that that's going to blow up really, because one of the things that is happening is this coming year, 700,000 workers' contracts are coming up in a period of mass inflation. And one of the contracts, which is very important to this class struggle, is the Teamsters and United Parcel Service workers. And this is 365,000 Teamsters. And the last strike, national strike of UPS, was very important in fighting the capitalists because it had broad support against part-time work, and it was mobilized. It was a national strike. So I think that what I see and what I think the United Front Committee for the Labor Party, which I'm part of, is to unite these struggles. In the case of the Teamsters, there is likely going to be a UPS strike. And our view is that the workers should go out with the Amazon and FedEx workers who are unorganized together. And they should push in an organized way to bring all these companies out, which would shut down the country and could win complete unionization of this industry. So we're talking, and what's happened in the Teamsters is that you have a leadership now, a guy O'Brien, who's having rallies with Bernie Sanders. I mean, he's a left talker, but he says he wants to fight. And so I think that the tide is growing in the United States for a mass workers movement developing. And the ability of the trading bureaucracy to hold down this struggle is diminishing. And the reason is that they don't want to fight. One big reason, they don't want to fight the Democrats. You have healthcare workers who are fighting at Kaiser, the health therapists of the NUHW, and 22,000 nurses, and they don't want to fight Newsom and the Democrats, and they don't want to unite even those unions at Kaiser, which is a major healthcare provider in California. So this union bureaucracy doesn't want to take out all the workers, which I think we have to fight for, as you do in Britain. It's a united fight, and internationally. The other thing is the war and imperialist war, because at the same time they can't even get the electricity back in Puerto Rico. They want to spend another $13 billion on the war in Ukraine. And unfortunately, the left in the United States has refused to, most of the left, have any kind of action against war. And I think that's the same in Europe, in Britain and Germany. In the midst of this Ukraine war, there are no mass protests, there's no fight by the left to unite against the war and NATO and the US imperialism. This is a political problem of the left in Europe and in the United States. Why? I think it's because of the difficulty of fighting the capitalist barrage in the United States for the war, but that has to be taken on. I think that there are other struggles. I mean, as Carol was saying, the railroad workers are conservative, they're conservative unions, but they are against the wall and they may vote down a contract and there may be a strike, which would be violation of the National Labor Relations Act. And that would pit the railroad workers against the government. And Pelosi and the Democrats have said they're going to pass legislation, but there's a problem, and that is the ability of the union bureaucracy to get workers to support the Democrats. If the Democrats directly attack the railway workers, is a big political problem. So I think in that case, we have to unite all workers with the rail workers and the ILW who don't have a contract. It wasn't an interview that I did with Trent Willis. It was, and I put it up on the chat. It was a presentation he made where he said that the workers have to use their power if they're going to get anything. They have to take work action. And the union bureaucracy is meeting with Biden and Marty Walsh, the Secretary of Labor, because they don't want to strike. They want to make a deal with the bosses, but they haven't been able to get a deal yet. And then the other thing that is very important about what's going on in the working class is the rise of fascism in the United States, because it's an international phenomena. In the United States, there's a split in the capitalist class, and a section, a very rich section, are supporting the military coup, are supporting Trump. So you have the richest capitalists in the world, Elon Musk and Larry Ellison, actually want a coup and have been supporting Trump. So when you have this internal struggle towards a military dictatorship or a coup, the question for the working class, what are the unions and workers going to do? And the Vermont AFL-CIO called for a general strike. We've discussed this before. Most of the left is completely silent about it. And in the unions, there's no discussion about the rise of fascism and the need to organize and prepare the working class for this development. And it has to do a lot with also the fight against racism, the attack on Asians, the attack on Blacks and Latinos in the United States, which is escalating. Again, the union bureaucracy do not want to have a political campaign and mobilizing campaign against the rise of racism and the threat of fascism. And I think that Marxists and those who want to fight in the interest of the working class have to tie this together with the fight, the economic fight. And I think that what is left out of the discussion so far is the question of the Democrats and a Workers' Party, a Labor Party, because you can't resolve this political crisis without the working class having a political alternative. There is no political alternative in the United States, mass working class political alternative. So I think the left have to fight to build a mass working class Democratic Labor Party with a program, socialist program, I believe, for answer to the crisis that it faces. And it's a fight against nationalism. I would say, though, that in the working class now, there's a recognition of workers that they're fighting international capitalism, not as a conscious force, but the fact that the companies that they're facing, Amazon, many of these companies are international companies. And auto now, their General Motors has got plants, assembly plants for trucks in Canada and Mexico. And the union bureaucracy does not want to bring those workers together for global strikes. But I think that's something now we can fight for internationally, a global strike of all GM workers, workers who work for the same multinationals. That's a task for internationalists and the comrades here from around the world to link up internationally and to build an international working class movement of direct action by workers working for the same companies globally.
If you could
the last
draw
point
to
I want to
close,
make is
please.
leadership. The question is building a leadership in the working class. And a lot of young workers who come into action in the United States have no education about the history of the working class, political education. That's going to take time. So I think the task of political education and history is absolutely critical in the United States, particularly with the development of a new working class movement.
Yep, thank you, Steve. Now, David, please.
Well, look, I think this is a very rich discussion, and thanks particularly for Richard and Jack giving a perspective which is very close to with very close knowledge of the labor movement. So we do not fantasize about the future. We have our eyes wide open, but we base our perspectives and our understanding of the situation on the facts and of the past and present traditions, you know, of the labor movement in the United States. Can I start a little with the international context, which Mellor raised, and I think was you know, a very interesting context. From the perspective internationally of the workers' movement, particularly in Africa and Asia and in Latin America, there is one solid reactionary mass, and it's called the USA. That is United States imperialism, and its undiminished unity is what's seen from afar. And it's a battle to understand, you know, what's taking place in the United States labor movement is absolutely critical to international perspectives, because what we are seeing in the United States, whether we see it advancing faster or a little slower, is the real deep reawakening of the working class in the United States. And I'm somewhat of an outsider inside the whale, the big United States, and there's not terribly much happening in semi-rural Rhode Island. That's what I thought. But then I found in a very obscure little place called Pawtucket, just down the road, I didn't know that there was a huge class fight because it wasn't announced, it wasn't on TV, and I didn't hear about it until just before leaving the United States. I'm presently in London. And that was a struggle of DHL workers, and it brought out students and the whole community in struggle and with a pitched battle with the police, which is unheard of in Rhode Island, at least in recent history. So a lot of this struggle which is taking place is somewhat localized, but that doesn't mean that it's extremely militant. It's actually a real class fight, and it's the police are, which I thought were relatively mild in Rhode Island, you know, really coming out with all strength to crush a movement, and actually a number of workers and protests and the demonstrators were injured. Now, I'm not saying therefore everything is moving ahead, but it's much deeper movement than I had anticipated. And unfortunately, the left, particularly in Rhode Island, although I've been trying to get in touch, you know, is not as well organized as I thought, but spontaneously young people, students and so forth, have gravitated around this movement. Now that's something new, and it's, I think, something which the left should be able to develop. And I think Mellor put the question in this way: a multi-racial class struggle, or let's put it another way, a non-racial class struggle, in the sense that race is a diminished factor in terms of class organization. Now, again, we must have no illusions. Many of the unions are called brotherhoods, and that's not just a slip of the tongue. It's very much brotherhoods, and it's very much a sense of a trade union movement has a feel about the past. But in discussion with, particularly with construction workers, and that seems to be a large segment in Rhode Island, they are undiminished and absolutely demanding union rates. They are not prepared to work for anything less than union rates. So the idea of the union is very strongly embedded in the American working class, and they are very sensitive to anything which is, you know, not a union rate. Now that is, I admit that that can lead to illusions in Democratic Party town councils and so forth, which practice union rates, but it is a standard which the workers aspire to, and which all workers, black or white, Latino, and the rest actually are demanding, for themselves. Sorry, I just had to stop that. Now, I think that's really important. Now, just let's look at the facts as they appear. Now, I think Richard was very, raised the question quite importantly about how we, must look at the facts in the face. The facts are that in the past period, that's from January to June, 76.6, in other words, 77% of the NLB, that's the National Labour Board, elections or contestations over strike have been won by, when they've been contested. And we see now 3 times the amount of strikes in the same period than in the previous year. Now, this is definitely a solid upsurge. And why it's solid and why it's likely to develop, and I put this, to the comrades who've come in, is because we've not yet seen a redress in the wages. Although there have been wage increases, if we look at it in terms of real wages, inflation's been rising enormously. I think we're looking at 8%, or at least, and again, it was 8%, and wages haven't risen to that extent at all. And so the workers are going to be returning time and again to this question, of struggle. Now, I know that the political fact is complex in this sense. Everybody is that, I could speak to every one of the unions is opposed, to a Trump victory in the next period. And that is a matter of some anxiety to workers. And the union leadership, instead of confronting that issue head on and discussing what it really means, to be a democratic society in every single sphere of society, and this is an important debate, which I think we need to return to in the future. Instead of that, they postpone the discussion. They try and put off what they, should be confronting, so that there's no debate. I think I've noticed this on a number of occasions at the union meetings and so forth. There's no debate about politics. So it's a very low level that we are seeing. But I do believe that with the infusion, particularly as I experienced in the small area called Pawtucket, of students and others becoming involved in the labor movement and in labor struggles, I do think this has an intense possibility for polarization. There is a certain tiredness after the Black Lives Matter. You cannot go on demonstrations for 6 or 9 months and not be tired after that. Some comrades have been fighting, for that period, time and again, almost every single day, having some level of organization, of struggle, coming out on the streets. It's absolutely fantastic. And yet there must be some tiredness, after that. And I do notice that people are preoccupied with family and other matters, because actually probably those matters have been strained in the past period. But once the movement gets moving again, I do believe that those forces will come to bear, and we'll be able to unite Black Lives Matter at the base, not at the top, and in other struggles raise these issues, which are polarizing, in America, and bringing the left back to life again. Just the last point in terms of the threat from the right. We do need a further discussion on this, because what we do see is some consolidation of the right internationally, of right-wing blocs, voting blocs and so forth in Europe and elsewhere, and the left in some disarray. The left actually very fragmented and in disarray. And we have to have really strategic discussions about how to unite our different forces to come together in the unions and beyond, to be able to build a united democratic defense by workers against the rise of right-wing ideologies, right-wing local campaigns, and so forth. I've been surprised actually how at the relatively low level of anti-immigration sort of feeling in my area in the States, as compared to South Africa at the moment. But the danger is there, and we want to fight it. I think we need further discussions in the future, and I just want to commend and congratulate the comrades for coming in and giving us a really tour de force in terms of the current state of the labor movement in America. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, David. And now Comrade Ed Bober.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much for particularly for all the comrades who sort of introduced this discussion, for your wealth of information and insights. What I'm saying is partly some sort of comments, but mostly questions. I mean, the tradition of the American working class, as I understand it, is very much sort of empirical and spontaneous. That is, you know, what works is right, and a movement, you know, doesn't arise necessarily out of ideology or any kind of political commitment. It arises out of, you know, some desperate crisis, some desperate issue that needs to be resolved. Steve, I think, was perhaps being a bit idealistic when he sort of complained that there's been no mass protests against the war. I mean, in the United States, during the time of the Vietnam War, there were lots of mass protests. And the reason is that body bags were coming home. For America at the moment, there are no body bags as a result of the war in Ukraine. And, you know, we have to recognize political consciousness, you know, starts where we are, and not with sort of, you know, idealistic ideas. My understanding of socialist politics in the USA, and this leads to a question. I mean, there are little groups of socialists here and there in different towns and so on, small groups. I'm talking about, you know, small handfuls of activists who are trying to understand what they can do to advance the cause of socialism. The thing is, it's not organized into a party nationally at the moment. And I mean, the question is, one question is, how do we begin? How can the movement in America, how can the activists in America begin to get those little groups of socialist activists together? I mean, I'm not talking about Trotskyists. I'm talking about groups of people who would like to see, for example, finances for college for all students in the USA, acceptance of the Black population as equal citizens, who would like to see gun control, who would like to see Black Lives Matter being more accepted and listened to by mainstream politicians. I mean, this is where the left begins, in a way, with sort of questions like that. A lot of those people who are just sort of arguing for those kind of political, you know, they're not arguing for socialism as a whole. They're arguing for some of those sort of political changes they would like to see, and they look to people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as people who represent some possibility of getting those kind of changes brought through. My question is, how do we move on from that? How does the left, how do the trade unions move on from that? Work with those sentiments in American society in a raw sense, in the American movement in a very broad sense. How do we work with that to begin to create a proper party of labor? That's it.
Right, that is the question. Thanks, Ed. There's no other comrades with their hands up at the moment. Oh, sorry, there is. Ricardo. At least he had his hand up before. Are you there, Ricardo?
Yeah. I accidentally put it down. I just want to say a couple of things. I mean, for the person that said that in Latin America, the USA, is only the main, is the big problem. I just want to say that, Latin America is a ground that imperialist, different imperialist forces are fighting for hegemony. So if you look, I'm referring a document by the European Union. It's called European Union External Action, dated from the 20th of January 20th, 2022. It says right here that the EU is the leading investor in Latin America and the Caribbean and its third external trade partner. What does that mean? It means that the US individually is still the main imperialist country investing in Latin America, but the whole European Union force, if you add the other, the imperialist European Union countries as a whole, they outnumber the United States in terms of investments, and actually in sectors like telecommunications. This is said in the last paragraph of this document that I'm quoting right here. In investments like so-called biodiversity, mining and other sectors, the EU leads in the region. So, and there are countries like Argentina that their main foreign debt is indebted to European Union banks. So Latin America is plundered and exploited by both the United States and the European Union imperialists. And that doesn't deny the fact that the United States is the most powerful and dangerous imperialist power. But, one of the issues that, make angry and a lot of Latin American activists is that the European Union plays this hypocritical role that, they do exploit in the third world in Latin America. Actually, the French imperialists have led since 1970 more than 70 military interventions in Africa. So, doing that at the behest, defending, European Union interests, particularly French mining, water resources in Africa. So I just want to throw that out, that, these imperialist countries, they do compete at the same time, they do collaborate at times. One thing that I want to mention in the particularly in the United States, is that the right wing is way more organized than we in the left. The right wing neo-fascists and fascists, they got gun clubs across the country. They do armed rallies, and they are significantly more dangerous. And we in the left still, have difficulties due to sectarianism to do common united front work. There is, whenever it's an economic crisis, as we know, and it's no secret that we are facing a worldwide economic crisis that, the forces of fascism are also going to grow. And we cannot ignore that. And we have to educate the working class, and try to organize one sector that is forgotten, that communists in the 30s effectively did in some parts of the world. We got to organize the unemployed, or at least direct some propaganda for the unemployed, and put using the transitional program, deal with this sector. So, we got way ahead, a whole bunch of tax, and we got to do meetings like this. So, we can exchange views about what to do and overcome one of the worst poisons that we have in the United States, and probably in other parts of the world too, which is unfortunately sectarianism. I just want to end, like, talking on one point that Comrade Steve Seltzer mentioned. And, it's the question, it's related to it. It's the question of, the environmental catastrophes that that are happening across the world due to, obviously, capitalism. And he said something true. I mean, Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States, is being devastated by hurricanes and storms severely in the last decade. And the answer of the U.S. imperialism is, supporting and encouraging and pushing for privatization, and it's driving that country to the end of economic and human despair down there. I'm originally from the colony, and actually, I'm a Hurricane Maria survivor. And believe me, it was horrendous being in there while that hurricane took place when that happened. So I just want to end it like this. I want to end it with the issues that I have mentioned. So it was a very good meeting, and I look forward to keep coming and working with this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Comrade Ricardo. I'm going to ask Jack and Richard to come in. If you could have, say,
Okay.
5 minutes each.
Yeah, it's okay if I go first, Richard?
Sure.
Yep.
I went first in the beginning.
Okay, so I want to stress, as I tried, probably didn't succeed, in saying that it's really important to not just look at the trade unions in the U.S., but to look at the situation among the unorganized, and I believe maybe people think that it's dynamic in the trade unions that's going to lead to bringing the unorganized in through the current trade union, organizing in the current trade unions. I think that the trade unions going to have to be revitalized, and that's going to come from movements from outside. I'm not going to go into the background on Starbucks, but the Starbucks organizing didn't start in January. There was organizing done for several years outside of the unions. It was done by people in the IWW and elsewhere. I spoke in Sonoma County at a labor center where over 100 people, almost all of them in their early 20s, showed up. And there were a worker center representative, a Starbucks organizing campaign. I was there from the Oakland Teachers Union, and the farm workers regional director was there, the United Farm Workers. So there has been, this was more than 10 years ago, there's been ongoing work going on, but it's going on to a large degree outside and in pieces. And the question is, can there be, and I believe there can, be something that revitalizes the trade union movement through an organization being unorganized? At least I hope so, because I believe that that's essential. In terms of the left, I can put forward all kinds of things that we should do. We should do this, and we should do that, and we should do the other thing. But the problem is that we can't, because we basically have undergone the death rattle of the old new left. We would have to analyze DSA and where it's at and so on. People have illusions in Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders keeps bringing people back into the Democratic Party while claiming he's not a Democrat. So I think that things are going to have to be shaken up from outside. I stressed the importance of fighting nativism before. I think that that's really important to fight against the anti-immigration and the racism. When we bring up the question of imperialism, how do you concretely bring that home and fight against it? The fact is that the working standards of workers outside of the unions, and those inside for that matter, have been, they have been battled. They've been battered for some time. I'm going to throw out one more fact, just because I think that this partial and throwing out this statistic and that statistic is not a way that people can capture the flavor of what's going on in a vast country like the US. David Hempson is bringing up construction and construction workers. The construction workers and unions exist because of Davis-Bacon Act, which guarantees that wages on federal contracts will be kept at a union level, and that therefore has kept the unions alive, because why not join the unions and because the leadership also disciplines the workers in the construction unions. Now, Davis-Bacon can go at any time that the ruling class feels that there's a need to clamp down on them, particularly if there's a Republican Congress, but it can happen in a Democratic Congress too. So this is something that has to be, viewed in, I think, in a much more overall way than just looking at this or that we have an increase of so much in terms of, of NLRB elections, or, as I said, I think that there's something that's rumbling and something beginning to erupt. But I think that to a large degree, much of it is going on outside of the organized labor movement. It's going to have to come in, but hopefully it's going to come in and there's going to be taking over. And I'm afraid that the old left is not going to be the group that's going to be taking the lead in this.
Well, thank you, Jack. Richard.
Okay, I'll try and be quick as well. I want to stress one thing, first of all. I had some influence in the labor movement when I was active in AFSCME, considerable, really. I was probably one of the most well-known leftists in AFSCME. It was very limited then. Today, I have nothing. I've got a blog. I think most of us, I could call a general strike tomorrow. I'll call a general strike tomorrow. And my influence is next to nothing. And the problem with the left, well, I don't want to get off this, but we need to establish that. And when we talk about somebody saying, well, we need a general wide, who are you calling that? I have no influence myself here. I want to touch on what happened in Kentucky and talk about opportunity knocks. In Kentucky, Louisville is the city of Louisville, about 30% black, I think. The teachers and parents there were the most militant. In the middle of the country, you've got the capital of the racehorse country. In the east of the country, you've got the white Trumpers, most of them on welfare, massive poverty. One of the black leaders of Black Lives Matter said to me one time, they're poorer than us. I don't understand. And during that struggle, they were calling in, the teachers union was calling to call in to the legislature, don't cut our pensions. Black teachers and parents said, could you add, don't pass the ganging ordinance. It will mean more horror for us. The union leadership refused to even do that. They didn't say organize against it, just tell the legislature. They refused. One of the trade union leaders comes on and says it will weaken us, it will divide us. She didn't mind fucking the black people over, excuse my language, in Louisville, to appeal to the white conservatives in Appalachia. So the black woman said to me, see, it's racist. I said, well, what position did the union leadership take? She said, well, they didn't support it. I said, so the whites in Appalachia who have nothing were faced with fighting the boss and their own leadership to support you. So they took the easy route, just like somebody else, the sister comrade from, somebody mentioned about going through the NLRB. So they took the easy route. Not only that, you had miners sitting on rail tracks for about 18 months, not letting a train pass. Then you had the GM strike, and the Louisville Central Labor Council, which incorporates part of Indiana, not involved. They took a few people down to a factory to picket it, but they were not involved in any of the other stuff. It was labor notes, DSA, nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. The same with, and then lastly, in terms of sectarian and everything else, my 30 years in my union, the left were non-existent. They were a hindrance. We had a couple of groups in my union. The Sparks, I remember, were there, and they were just there to attack me because I was in the left group at the time. They have been, I think they will have no influence in the coming, and there is a coming. They will have no influence in it. Hopefully, some of them will be saved by it. Most of us come from that background, you know. I look forward to it, but I think what we used to call the sects, I've changed now, because when I think of it, we used to say we're the genuine Marxists. If that's not sectarian, what the hell is, you know? But I was attracted to the CWI because they weren't like the rest of them. But the thing is that there's as far as the left saying, I think and I agree with Jack. I used to think, and I'll end up here. I used to think that well, I was taught to, being in this CWI, that the workers would return to their organizations, would fight through their organizations. I still feel that, but things have changed. I believe too now that when, and it's happening, that it will begin outside of those organizations. And yes, they'll play a huge role in them. Just the crane operators strike recently, a couple of years ago, that can shut down the whole country. So I think that there was too many things to respond to, so I'll just say what I feel right now. But anyway, that's my view about it. I think the left, I don't look to the left, to be honest with you, as it is. Not that there's not very genuine people in it. I don't look to it as playing much of a role at all in the movement that's coming. So that's me, Roger.
Well, thank you very much to everybody who participated, especially to Richard and Jack. I hope everybody will agree that it's been a very democratic discussion and also a very international discussion. And that's something that we pride ourselves in winning. If there are any comrades here who are not on our mailing list, could you please you could private message me with your email address, and I'll make sure you get notices of future meetings. I'd also like to announce about next week's meeting. There were quite a lot of references in the discussion today to the danger of fascism or far-right parties gaining strength and even gaining power. And we do have actually two very, very ominous and disturbing events just now. One is last week, the victory of a far-right coalition in Sweden. Sweden, a country which is has got a reputation somehow, and I know that Bernie Sanders used to refer to it as if it was a kind of, if not socialist, then at least very enlightened and democratic and social democratic. But we have an outright fascist party, which is now part of the ruling coalition in Sweden. And tomorrow we have elections in Italy, which are likely to result in another extreme right-wing coalition, including, again, a party which has actually explicit fascist roots and history. So we have a comrade from Sweden who will be speaking next week, and perhaps putting in context that event. So I hope every comrade will participate, will come and attend that meeting, and all our future meetings. If anybody has anything else to announce, if not, I'll thank everybody for their attendance and close the meeting. Bye, comrades.
Take care, Roger. There's a
Oh, sorry, one thing. Well, there is one thing I wanted to announce. I'm sorry. Particularly for the comrades in Britain. The Labour Party conference has started, and that is not at all an exciting announcement at all. But from tomorrow, there is a parallel event, if you like, taking place called the Future of the Left. It's on Monday and Tuesday, it's online, and on Wednesday, it's taking place physically in Liverpool and also online. And it's, well, my own particular participation in it is tomorrow morning, I'm chairing the debate on Ukraine. And on Wednesday, I'm speaking in the debate on one of the participants in the debate on the question, is Labour dead? Which I find not one of the hardest questions I've ever had to answer, but it's a controversial topic. So any comrades who want to log in, please do. I think you'll find it online. Just key in Future of the Left Conference. Okay. Right. That's it. Thank you, comrades. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Raj.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.